Alright, so before we begin, here's a few forewords. First, this is my first foray into the video essay format, if you don't count the Omori recap, which I personally don't. 2, this is a video essay. Again, hello! As such, there's going to be spoilers ahead for The Windows Are Gone, so if you haven't played it yet, then it's like an hour long and it's free. Go out, grab it, and then come back and we can discuss in the comments. Alternatively, I did do a gameplay video that cuts that time in half. You can go watch that if you want. No pressure. Third, this is going to be my impressions, cogitations, and worst of all, opinions on the game, so expect discrepancies. All this to say that I am unfortunately mortal and am thus prone to mistakes, so make sure you tell me how wrong I am in the comments section below, and subscribe because I still love you even if you're wrong. The Windows Are Gone is a free game by Scary Cube, a Brazilian developer with one other game currently under their belt. It's a game about, well, a lot of things, I think. I'm not entirely sure. You see, as of the time writing the script, I played this game about 2 weeks ago, and I haven't stopped thinking about it since. I can't record, I can't eat dinner, I can't sleep without this game creeping back up into the back of my mind like a buried shadow lurking just behind its unsuspecting prey. I'm writing this essay to both try to assuage this feeling and hopefully validate my obsessions. The story begins after the accident, as our main character moves out to Mariana, to a house that's been plaguing his dreams and drawing him in, like a light glowing in the abyss. An introductory cutscene has our protagonist explain that in his dreams he's seen this house, he feels it calling for him ever since the accident, and that no matter what he does, he can't stop thinking about this house in Mariana. This could be a reference to the literal town of Mariana in Brazil, or possibly an allusion to the Mariana Trench, the deepest known part of the ocean on the planet. A place so dark and oppressive that the only means of traversing it is by proxy, as no human can withstand the overwhelming pressure of its depths. The camera pans upside down to herald our slow descent. And so, we answer it. We're given control as our mother texts us, asking how the funeral went. We couldn't bring ourselves to go. Grief affects everyone differently, and it's clear that we've chosen to isolate ourselves due to the shock of this incident. We begin the slow process of transferring our past into the new house, and our mother wishes us safety. Allowing the support of friends and loved ones is vital for overcoming trauma. One by one, we begin transferring our belongings into their respective rooms, and soon we're accompanied by the soundtrack. Now, anyone who watches my content or listens to me ramble for more than a few minutes can confirm that one of the most important aspects for me in media, more so than the framing of the scene, is the sound design around it, and this game delivers at every turn. I'll talk more about it later, but this introductory sequence is by and large just as important as any preceding moment in the game. It's a time of reflection and introspection for both of us. Not only just for the protagonist, but for you, the player as well, on your own life and choices. It's almost sobering. Just as quickly, though, the music fades and you're left with only the sounds of the house itself, the telltale creaks and groans of a settling and aged house, speaking its life story to anyone patient and trusted enough to listen. Like all serene moments, however, this too will fade, and eventually you'll find it. Either immediately as soon as you walk in, or just like in my first time through, after you'd already moved in several boxes. A single VHS tape marked tape number 1, My Family, sits on a shelf near the hallway in the kitchen. It had always been here, regardless of when you see it. Placing it in your VCR reveals a middle-aged man, spending time with his family in the backyard. Your backyard. These people are clearly the former owners. They're all smiling and having a great time, and yet something feels off to us, like the man is hiding something, not only from his family, but from us as well. Once again, it feels as if we're being lured deeper and deeper into this dark, inky blackness. One of the children falls and begins to cry, but as the man goes to turn off the camera, there's a sense of connection between the man and we, the viewers. As if the man knows we're watching him, and as the video ends, we're left wondering just what happened to these people. We dwell on this as we offload more boxes, but eventually our reflection is interrupted by a ringing from the front door. The neighbor greets us from the other side. She's here to welcome us to the neighborhood and tells us that the locals are friendly and that she has a welcome gift for us. And that she left it in the counter. Somehow this woman had gotten in while we weren't looking. The music stings as we're immediately met with a sense of insecurity, knowing that this woman managed to get into our house without us knowing. She tells us that this house should be familiar to us, but doesn't elaborate. She insists that we try her pastries. The game doesn't allow us to continue until we try the gustoli on the table. It's a fried pastry similar to a funnel cake or a donut. And despite every warning bell sounding in our head, begging us not to fall for this clear and obvious trap, the gustoli are fine. Delicious even. Our fears and apprehensions are immediately lifted, and as we return to thank the woman, she's gone. Only the plate in the kitchen and a single note on the ground saying "Welcome home" left as proof that she was ever here. After this incident, the protagonist laments that he's exhausted, understandably. Between what I assume to be a long drive, the titular accident, and this most recent encounter, all coupled with the current stressors and mind space of the protagonist, it's so wonder he hadn't passed out sooner. He decides to try out his new bed in the master bedroom, and we drift off into slumber. It's here that we begin to gain some insight on what the protagonist has been through, as this time he doesn't dream of the house. This time, his mind is taken to the night of the accident. In the abstractness of the dream world, we find ourselves behind the wheel as a fog of thick, deep crimson envelops the road and the world around us. Our headlights struggle to illuminate in front of us, and the street lamps act as naught but floating orbs through the haze. We looked over to see our wife in labor pains as we race to the hospital. She assures us that she's fine given the situation, but urges us to drive carefully. But despite our best efforts, the accident still happens, and our wife, unfortunately, is still very much dead. It's only now that we learn her name, Jessica. We call out to her as the fog begins to envelop us. We never learn any more than this abstraction, as we're left with only the rhythmic sound of dripping. A permeation of reality seeping in and pulling us back into the waking world. The dripping, of course, is coming from downstairs. The sound design here is immaculate, as I was almost immediately able to figure out that just from sound alone, it had been coming from the deepest part of the house, the basement. On our way down, we find another tape, this one labeled "The Accident." However, we can't do anything about it right now, so we turn to see a black, sludgy puddle forming from the drips in the ceiling. The anatomy of the house seems to suggest that this is coming from the ground floor bedroom. However, it was locked when we'd arrived, so we can't confirm it just yet. For some strange reason, we feel a sense of unease looking at it. We decide, ultimately, to deal with it in the morning. Depression is known to inhibit our ability to perform even mundane tasks. Something even as simple as a phone call to a plumber can seem nearly insurmountable. Eventually, though, we find ourselves awake again, and are greeted this time by a text from our dad, asking how it's going now that we have arrived in Mariana. He asks if the house was everything we'd ever hoped for, and I'm certain he already knows the answer, but nonetheless we reassure him and set back out to finish bringing in the boxes. But not before viewing that new tape from earlier. This time, the man from before is in the basement with his family above in the backyard once again. This time, it appears he's contemplating what to say, what to tell us, the viewer. Finally, he manages to shake off this feeling that he himself can't describe in order to warn us of an impending disaster that's about to befall his family, something that he swears will be his fault. He's overtaken by his emotions and accidentally drops a tool on the ground as he begins to sob uncontrollably. His words feel specifically directed towards us. Even though he can no longer bring himself to communicate, it's clear he feels an overwhelming guilt for what will soon come to pass, what has likely already come to pass for us. This tape may be implying that this is the man that caused our accident, the one who killed our wife and child. The protagonist wonders why the man didn't stop the events from having happened, and what the point of these tapes even are. The third tape, Rumble, is also revealed to us at this point, having been placed on the table in the kitchen by someone or something. This time, the tape reveals something seemingly supernatural, as the man appears to hover in pure darkness, surrounded by countless red streaks, reaching from vistas unknown to depths further unknown. They pulsate, and we can feel them through the very screen before us. We feel the man's despair, guilt, and regret, but can't seem to look away as he barely forms his sentences. There's a deep ache in his eyes as he's overburdened by both the entities surrounding him and the sheer weight of his sin. He calls out for his family, knowing that they're long gone, with only himself to blame. All his pain and torment seeping through the screen and into us. And as he opens his mouth to scream, the video abruptly ends, and we're left feeling almost ashamed, but also like we needed to see this. We can dwell while we work, however, and as we go back outside, we see that the sun is beginning to set as we continue our gradual descent. More boxes means more music, only this time it carries a feeling of unease and pensiveness, as any notion of security is dashed away earlier. However, once again, we're allowed time to process and reflect on what's happened. I feel like this is important, as simply bombarding us with themes of horror and cheap thrill would diminish the message, and giving us time to not only recuperate but also dwell on the journey so far only serves to add to the suspense of the future. Once we've finished bringing the boxes in, it's finally time to unpack. We find ourselves repeatedly asking what we're actually doing here, as if pulled from our safe shallows to the cavernous maw of the beast. It's a natural response to trauma to try to distance oneself from what reminds us of it. Whatever the reason, we're here now, and we have to make the most of it. This marks the first and only semblance of true control we've been given in the game. This may also be a metaphor for the protagonist finally mentally unpacking from the trauma of the accident we learned was 2 weeks prior. We're allowed to place items in the various rooms of the house and can interact with a few of them to learn a bit more about our former wife, Jessica. She was a painter, she listens to alternative rock, she was a sculptor and a damn good one. She found herself doubting her work more and more as time went on, despite her best efforts to reassure her. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we can't heal another's aching mind. We continue unpacking, and this time it's Jess's brother texting to comfort us. He tells you that it isn't your fault. A healthy support structure, once again, is integral to recovery. We also learn of the protagonist, how he's been taking pills since the accident, likely painkillers or just as likely antidepressants. Either way, they aren't working despite the doctor's orders. What I find most interesting, however, is the objects which have no story. No interaction to them, especially those which you'd expect to have something important to tell us, like the pictures in the upstairs hallway being a prime example. It would seem as though the more things we dig up, the more we simply want to forget. Once again, however, our work is cut short by the ring of a doorbell. Only this time, the thing that greets us isn't a person, but an orb of pure void greets us just off of our porch and vanishes as we approach. This is the herald of our final descent. As we re-enter our house, the TV turns on by itself, yet another faint light to draw us in. As we come closer, we're just barely able to make out the faintest sound amongst the static, sounds of someone crying. After this interaction, we hear another door open. Through both context and sound design, we know this to be the final locked door, the downstairs bedroom. Inside, in the center of the room, is a single box which we have no memory of bringing in. Inside are memories which we've been trying our hardest to forget, things that we'd long since tried to throw away. A rotting maternity album, moldy baby shoes, more of Jessica's paintings, some of which you'd never seen, as if she'd been too ashamed to show them and allow them to see the light of day. An insurance agent texts you, telling you what you already know. The car was totaled. An important note is that he was saved in your contacts as Prick, likely an act of rage against a clearly callous and uncaring firm. You also get another text from an unknown caller. It's blank, but calling the number on the phone in the office reveals more unpacking, and you hear a crack in the basement. Investigating reveals that the puddle has grown, now a pulsating, smelling pile of matted sludge. We find ourselves revolted, but despite every fiber of us telling us to do something, we can't help but to ignore it, to try to push it back from our minds, to deny it ever existed. We proceed back upstairs and reluctantly continue to unpack. Eventually, from this moment on, as you continue, you'll undoubtedly notice that something is off about the house. Namely, that the back door and several windows have vanished, leaving only solid walls in their wake. With each item placed, with each act of settling in, the house has been slowly and steadily closing off any and all means of escape, until eventually you find yourself completely cut off both mentally and literally from the outside world. All means except one. A tapping leads us to the basement once again as the final window, a final light, lures us into a corner, and the maw shuts. The door behind us slams closed, and we find ourselves a prisoner of whatever brought us here. Opening the door reveals that same orb from before, and as we approach, the basement locks behind us, and the orb too begins its descent. It envelops us, and we're cast into the darkness. The same darkness as the man in the tapes, as those same streaks begin to appear around us. Deep within the fog, something approaches. Our hunter, our judge, our wife. Towering above and below us, she turns to face us, and our resolve is finally tested. We find ourselves back on the stairs once again, only this time as we ascend, we find that the world is both figuratively and literally turned upside down. Our mother, once supportive, now berates us for what we've done, calling us a disappointment. Our mind undoubtedly using our loved ones as villains to justify our self-hatred. The house too has changed now, its anatomy elongating and vanishing as we wander the madness around us. The stairs leading to the second floor have vanished, destroying any hope of reascension. Something else is here with us as well, crawling just outside of view. Down the hall is a door leading us back into the house's festering womb. The sludge in the corner now forming a living, writhing mound slowly gaining form. It groans and sobs and cries as we struggle to grasp what we're seeing. We exit the basement again to find what was crawling around earlier. A mangled and sinister echo of Jessica skitters away into the living room. Following her reveals the final tape, Birth, on a stand near the TV, the only piece of furniture still attached to the ground. The video shows the man in a distorted reflection of his agony, all of his pain and fear and memories, all seemingly played at once. The protagonist describes it as both frightening and beautiful. Any semblance of what the man was is now disfigured beyond recognition, and we feel a deep empathy for him as this tape becomes a conduit of suffering shared. His pain mirrors ours, and the catastrophe has shattered both our worlds. Our eyes lock, and the man is now fully aware of our presence as the tape abruptly ends. A demon confronted, and both closure and acceptance granted. Soon, all of the furniture is gone as we proceed further into this limbo of our own creation. The house expands to trap us further, forming itself into a labyrinth to prevent our escape. Within, we find more paintings of Jessica's, ones that we'd never seen her paint before. Once again, we pass through the basement in our cyclical catabasis, and the only thing awaiting us this time is Jessica herself, sitting in the corner of the kitchen, focused on something. She asks if we'd seen her latest paintings, tells us that she'd been thinking of both us and our baby. She also asks us if we remember her asking what God looks like. We can try to tell her our feelings, but it doesn't seem to matter. She tells us that her child is crying, and it's evident that that amalgamate in the basement is a vile representation of what should have been our baby. Going downstairs, we're met with our final choice as Jess asks us to join her in Laura. Here that you're given two options. You can forsake the outside world, all your friends and loved ones, and succumb to this festering rot within. Only the sounds of a straining rope greets you as the final text crawls across the screen. Or you can let go, leave the past behind, and truly begin anew. No matter how painful your trauma, and no matter how dark the abyss may seem, there's always hope and light at the surface, but it must be you who opens the door to let the light in, to allow yourself back into reality. You're free to wander the house at this point, but eventually you leave this behind as well. In the final cutscene, the protagonist tells us that ever since the accident, we'd been haunted by guilt. They had built themselves a labyrinth but managed to escape. This was, technically speaking, the ending I should have gotten in my initial playthrough. However, whether by bug or by intent, the text crawl that I had gotten simply repeated the final line in the intro, and so I answered. I'd initially thought that this was the protagonist finally hearing the call of the trauma and overcoming it. After the credits, it repeated one final time and refused to boot out to menu, so I too had to make the conscious choice to close the game and leave it all behind. But, to cycle back to the main thesis of this video and the whole reason I recorded this essay, what is this game about, really? Well, grief, obviously, sure, but there's still some factors that I simply don't get. For example, the woman at the beginning who broke in, left snacks and left. The man in the tapes, the orb and its origin, hell, even the house itself. Why this house specifically? It's here that I delve fully into theory crafting, so bear in mind that nothing I say here is explicitly stated in-game. The house could represent, most obviously, the protagonist's own mind palace, his moving in and unpacking representative of him closing himself off from others, and as we find ourselves deeper and deeper entrenched into it, we find it unraveling at the seams. It could be a representation of purgatory, as we're judged for our own self-imposed crimes, and the result of which could be our rite of passage into heaven or our admission into hell. Alternatively, and bear with me on this, it could represent Jessica, someone our protagonist no doubt has thought of constantly since the accident, someone with flaws and stories revealed to anyone patient and trusted enough to listen. The amalgamate sludge could play into this theory too, being forever locked in the bowels of the house, never able to surface. The orb therein could represent a number of things as well. God, death, our own psyche judging us for what everyone says isn't our fault. The man in the tape could represent our inner turmoil of trying to deal with this accident, or, in my opinion, more likely, could be, in fact, the same man who crashed into us that night. The man who had also lost his own family in the same crash, begging us for forgiveness. Or, perhaps we take this story literally, that there is a house in Mariana, Brazil that draws in those with traumatic events in their lives that have cost them their loved ones. Maybe the woman in the beginning knew that you two were just another in a long line of individuals who'd been lured in to feed an entity that lured you into its lair. Yeah, alright, so if you made it this far, then this is the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you see and want to see more, then definitely do subscribe. Depending on how this video goes, it may change the course of this channel, but not right now, because this video took like 20 plus hours in total to edit and record and research and... But if you do like what you see, please let me know in the comments below, and subscribe and bell and all that other YouTuber stuff. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this. So thank you again for watching, and remember to stay warm, stay safe, stay hydrated, and of course, as always, remember that you are loved. Have a great weekend.